and welcome to another episode of BACCF's Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce of Florida's podcast. I'm joined here by my co-host, Carlos Mariaca, who's been a long-standing member and dedicated volunteer for the Chamber. Since when? When was your first step into the Chamber?
Oh, well, I joined the Chamber when I was in college in '95, but I joined the board in 2007.
It's good. We're depreciating over time. It's good. And we're joined here by David Hodge, a distinguished retired member of the State Department who has extensive experience in Latin America, including Brazil, which we now have to kind of put you on the spot. So we learned that you were on the board for Graded and not for Chapel. Now, considering that the two of us are Trojans, I mean, we had to call you out on that.
Well, I don't think Chapel asked me to be on the board. So we did
Fair
have
enough.
more students at Graded. I will say that. But it was a longer commute to go to the Graded meetings. I'll have to admit that. And most of them were like at 7 a.m. So.
Oh, wow. Well, I also want to welcome you and thank you. It was a pleasure seeing you at our annual feijoada, the beans, a couple of weeks ago or a few weeks ago. It's always a pleasure to see people during one of our signature events. And I also want to thank you for your extensive service to our country in the past few years or several years in the State Department.
Thanks,
So,
Carlos.
thank you.
I appreciate it. The feijoada was a great event. I certainly got my share. So.
It was great to see you there. Why don't we jump in? Tell us a little bit about how'd you get started in the State Department? I don't think it's an unusual path for someone to grow up thinking, I want to be a career diplomat.
That was exactly not my path. I mean, I grew up in Indianapolis. I went to Indiana University. I studied business management, business administration, and I also was a Spanish major. So I think much to my mom's disappointment, I actually went into diplomacy rather than into business as my career out of college. And going to graduate school in international relations at Georgetown. I was an intern at the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica. But I got the idea when I was an exchange student in Spain. I walked by the U.S. consulate in Seville, Spain every day on my way to class, and I thought, oh, I could work here and live here. So that's where I got the idea. But I had that great experience as an intern in the economic section in Costa Rica and decided I wanted to join the Foreign Service. And I did, and I went to Rio for my first assignment.
Nice. That must have been quite a change.
Yeah.
And during those years, you mentioned studying economics and business, but how did your career intersect with not just international relations, but also on the commerce side?
So I spent almost 34 years in the Foreign Service, and I did like a wide variety of things. I was what we called a generalist. So we kind of divide our work into 5 different areas, but I worked in 4 of the 5: political work, economic work, consular work, which I did in Rio in the beginning and went back as a manager later, and then public affairs, which is what I ended up focusing on. And then the commerce promotion really became when I became a senior officer. I was the deputy chief of mission in Guatemala. I did a stint as the charge in Panama. And then, of course, being principal officer of Sao Paulo, which is the best job for a U.S. diplomat, at least in Western Hemisphere, I'll say. There's a huge commercial focus. The consulate has 110 Americans who work there. It's larger than many of our embassies around the world, and it has one of the largest foreign commercial service offices too. So, obviously, it's a main focus of what we do because Sao Paulo is Sao Paulo. Visiting delegations, whether they're businessmen or government leaders, highlighting that the state of Sao Paulo has an economy larger than Colombia or Argentina, just to give people an idea of like what the magnitude. The largest economies in South America are Brazil and then Sao Paulo.
Which is great because it leads into my next question, which is, how do you see the importance of Brazil to the U.S. on commerce and trade?
I think it's always been important. I think it's grown in importance. I think there's some work left to do. I think that we have not been as aligned and close. The free trade area of the Americas, that was an idea that died. I think Brazil is the one who had the main focus in not moving forward in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. I think we would the region would look very different if that had gone forward. But I think that the economies are incredibly close. The U.S. is by far is the largest investor in Brazil. I'm sure we'll talk about China at some point in this conversation. Chinese investment has grown. Certainly, Chinese commerce. China supplanted the U.S. as a starting trading partner. But when you look at investment, it's still by far U.S. companies are the largest investors in Brazil. So I think super close could continue to become more integrated and closer.
Yeah,
and I think there are opportunities. I think COVID showed us that the idea of friend-shoring, taking advantages of Brazil's natural resources, its clean energy matrix. There are a lot of ways that I think that and looking at critical minerals now. I think there are a lot of ways looking ahead that Brazil could become even more important for the U.S.
And you touched on a very important point: is how a sense of having a little bit more safety or security behind your supply line and pretty much all the goods that you need for manufacturing brings the conversation on, okay, so if we're nearshoring and Brazil is an important partner, why not bring everything to Brazil, as Mexico, for instance, right? And I'm sure it's never that easy. So what can you tell us a little bit about how complex it is to actually structure these things?
I think that there are legal challenges. I think that there are certain cost issues in Brazil that continue to make Brazil less competitive. The custo Brasil. We had the free trade agreement with Mexico, and with basically half of South America and Central America. We already had free trade agreements during my time. We had it with Central America, Panama, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. Brazil and Mercosur, no free trade agreement, and so that put additional costs onto that kind of investments. But I think that those things, and now we're looking at a different trade environment under President Trump, and I think that is going to be, we also what happened with the Supreme Court last Friday. Brazil, I guess it's a win for Brazil because Brazil will now be 15%, and so it'll go down. That'll be for the next 5 months. I think it's really hard in this environment for companies and for governments, foreign governments, to plan, because I think that we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And under the authority that the new 15% tariff is, that's for 150 days, and then it would have to Congress would have to approve it. I don't see any support in the current Congress to extend that. But then there are other authorities that the President Trump does have, Special 301. There are other authorities. So I think the amount of uncertainty has grown certainly a lot from when I was working in Brazil. I was there in Sao Paulo from 21 to 24.
Did you miss it?
I miss Sao Paulo, of course. In some ways, my heart's in Rio because I started in Rio. We have an apartment in Rio. I was in Rio in January, but I'm always happy when I'm landing back in Brazil.
Well, we've seen a lot of Brazilian companies moving here, especially from the financial sector. Yep. A lot of these different finance companies coming here. What does this signal about Brazil's innovation and competitiveness from your point of view? Yeah,
Brazil is such an innovative place, and there's so many industries where Brazil is really leading. You mentioned, financial, fintech, where Brazil has been a big leader. I know Nubank looking at the U.S. They told me that years ago they were thinking about looking at the U.S. So I think look at Embraer. I mean, I think that I think airplane parts are the largest export from Florida to Brazil. Yeah. And I think that and you look at agricultural cooperation also from Brazil investing in orange groves decades ago, and one of the I would say the main thing a U.S. consulate or U.S. embassy does is try to promote U.S. business in that home country, increase U.S. exports. But there's also the reverse part that we do also, looking at, and the Commerce Department has its Select USA process, which is a big summit they do once a year, and they invite Brazilian companies, small, medium, large, to a big summit where they bring representatives from every state and from every regulatory agency. And it's a way for companies to explore how they might and where they might. I mean, the U.S. is a huge as you know, a huge country, and different states offer different incentives and are more, maybe more attractive. So I think that that's something that the U.S. consulate in Sao Paulo really did, was try to not only increase your exports to Brazil, but looking at Brazilian companies to invest. And some companies have been here for decades. I mean, you look at JBS and you look at some of, especially in the ag field, where Brazil has become, so competitive with the U.S. But I think it keeps us, both countries, it's good for us.
Yeah, no, we as a chamber, that's part of our mission. I mean, we've been organizing for 23 years. We do a seminar here, bringing companies from Brazil to learn how to do business here for 3 days. And then to promote that, we do road shows through Brazil, where we go to 12 different cities every year, trying to take information on how to do business here, precisely to promote companies to come and invest and set up their companies here and hire people here. So we have a lot of that same mission. When you were mentioning Select USA, that's a lot of what we do. But besides the obvious size of the economy, what other things do you think that attract those Brazilian companies to come here, besides the obvious size of the economy?
Yeah, I think it's the size. I think that there are cultural ties, there are educational ties. So many Brazilians have studied in the U.S., go back and work in Brazil. But I think that those connections are really important. And whether they're cultural connections, educational ones, family ones, I think the importance of the diaspora, I imagine, will increase those kinds of ties also. So I think visas will be a challenge. I think that we've seen visa restrictions. Visas have always been an issue. I started at Windows 6 in Rio. For anyone who might have gotten their visa from 92, 94, I was in Windows 6. And then Sao Paulo has, depending on the week, the first, second, third, fourth busiest visa section in the world. When I left, I had 32 first, second tier officers at Windows in 2 different shifts, because the demand never seems to stop for Brazilians. And we've seen the pause in immigrant visa processing for Brazilians. I think that that's going to be a choke potentially in some of the things that I think that the chamber wants to do and has traditionally done in the past. I'm not predicting, because I think that no one really knows exactly what's in the front for that, but I think that's a challenge.
So if we forget for a second just the politics of it, how do both countries manage to work together closer, mainly building on commercial bridges and private relationships? I mean, non-public.
Yeah, I think that Brazil and the U.S., I always describe to people, they're both on 4-year presidential cycles, 2 years apart. So every 2 years, there's a presidential election in one of the two countries, and so you have shifts. We're the two largest democracies in the Western Hemisphere. The shifts have gotten greater over time. I think that before, I would look at the beginning of my career and starting in the 90s, you would see shifts politically back and forth in both countries, but the issues didn't change that much. I think, as the U.S. has become more polarized politically and Brazil has become more polarized politically, I think that we're seeing more ups and downs in what happens every 2 years or every 4 years, every 6 years when the president changes. And I think that underlying that, the ties between cultural institutions, educational institutions, and the private sector. I think the private sector has an incredibly important role in trying to smooth out some of those differences. I think that the private sector, we work closely with the AmCham in Sao Paulo. Both the ambassador and I are honor members of the board. I mean, I was with AmCham, and they're of course right by the consulate, at least every month, usually every week for something. I think those commercial things, obviously behind the scenes, can have an enormous influence on trying to smooth out some of those differences. I think that, the Brazilian community in the U.S., I would encourage people to be more politically active in a bipartisan way. I think that is a way that is really important, and it's really important in Washington. And I don't think necessarily the private sector is as deeply integrated in Washington and Capitol Hill as other countries are. I think that there might be some. We're sitting here in beautiful Miami, but I think that working in Washington on a bilateral basis in the Congress is important also.
You just mentioned the Brazilian community here, and obviously we're more connected to the business one, but the Brazilian U.S. community keeps on growing here in the U.S. What do you see as some of the bigger contributions or some contributions that the Brazilian community has brought to the U.S.? Besides
the churrascaria, in every block, literally there are a million places to go, and the great Pompano grocery store I go to also. I think that in some places it's super obvious. Like here in Florida, there's such a great numbers, but there are pockets of the U.S. where I think the Brazilian influence is very low, and so I think that I think technology and these kinds of events can like really get the word out more. I think that even like exchange programs, I go back to like how, we would send, whether they were high school students, we had youth ambassadors, or whether they're Fulbrighters. It's like, you are ambassadors to Brazil going, and we would never send like an exchange person to Miami. Like, no, you have to go to Omaha, or you have to go to Indianapolis, where I'm from, or you go someplace. I would even tell people when they're wanting to study in the U.S. to look beyond New York and Florida, to look for places where they can have more of an influence and can learn more and explain more also.
Well, that brings me to a point that we talked briefly at the Feijoada about that mission from National War College that came down during COVID. And I think experiences like those of actually having senior folks go and see the country is incredibly helpful. My question to you is, I know that happens from the U.S. towards Brazil, but does Brazil reciprocate? Meaning, is there a pool of senior level people that are interested in furthering the conversation, regardless of politics, thinking more policy, and they make the trip over and try to understand the U.S. and meet with more people?
I think, like, you think about the counterpart of the war college is that, yes, I mean, actually the ties and educational ties between U.S. and Brazilian military have traditionally been very strong, and that's continued, I would say, has been on a very nonpartisan level. I think that getting more people from the Brazilian Congress to understand the U.S. better, I think that's a challenge. And frankly, we don't have as many U.S. Congress people going to Brazil as I think we should. So I think that the more we can, there's a little bit of a...
Well, the Brazilian caucus is on and off at times, right?
Right.
Sometimes
but those are relatively
sometimes
small in both places, I would say. So I think that the level of knowledge of the average person in Congress could be higher as far as what the challenges. I think they know what the challenges are in Brazil sometimes, but not necessarily the opportunities. And there's nothing like seeing things, with your own eyes.
Yeah.
Like, what as a career diplomat, whenever we had congressional people coming to Brazil, in my previous job in Guatemala, our goal is to present the widest variety of people from the government, from the opposition parties, from civil society, and from the business community. I think that you get, getting to sit down with people, really discuss the issues it's different than getting it through a filter through your staff or through the media or whatever. So I think that the more we can get people to go back and forth, the better the relationship will be.
I think that's part of our role, right? On the policy side. We do have a special committee that is addressing those gaps, where it's like briefing people that need to understand how Brazil operates, what the different opportunities are. And as Brazilians, we're always quick to criticize, say, "Oh, I know what's wrong." It's like, okay, but let's focus on what's also working, what's right. So Brazil, for instance, and not many people know this, has one of the most sophisticated banking systems in the world.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, before Zelle, we had
Pix.
something. No, even before that, there was just the equivalent of the Zelle there.
Yeah.
It's been around for 30 years plus.
Yeah.
So it's there are a lot of interesting things coming out of Brazil, but we, I think, as a country, there's no proper marketing of sorts to kind of address these gaps in knowledge and relationships.
I think U.S. companies that have been there for 70, 80, 90, more than 100 years, they have a very good understanding of the excellence and the expertise that exists. I mean, you look at a company like Boeing that is created one of their engineering centers in San Jose dos Campos because they know what amazing talent there is in, not only to hire, but the kind of the ecosystem that exists in Brazil. I think that, the Brazilian government has not been as, I think they've made, fighting against that kind of investment, I think is a short-sighted. I think there was pressure from the other parts of the industry. I think it's short-sighted. I think that you want Brazil to grow as an aerospace hub, and having multiple companies investing in that is a positive thing.
I mean, even in the pharma industry, we've got J&J right next door, also in San Jose. Yeah. They've been there since the 60s, 70s is the latest. And they're definitely a proof of how excellent the economy is and how talented people are, and that there's business and opportunities there.
And I think the numbers show it, because I remember looking at, I don't have the 2025 figures for Brazil and Florida, but I still have in my mind the 2024 figures. And planes and parts and helicopter parts are two of the most imported and exported
by
products.
value, they're number one.
Yeah, by value, number one between Florida and Brazil. But then there's also some other categories that have to do with aerospace and drones, and a lot of it has to do with those industries. And there's a lot of things going back and forth in terms of product and import and export in that field. So the numbers show it.
Yeah. And those are high value things that like provide good jobs and good incomes in both countries. I'll give my going back to a little bit the China thing, as far as I will just say that U.S. companies have had decades of experience, and they are good. Those are good jobs. People working for a U.S. multinational in Brazil, I think you would agree, is considered like one of the best things, one of the best jobs one can get. And I think that it's because of the training, because of the ethics that the U.S. companies have, because they do pay their taxes, they do corporate social responsibility. I think that continues, and I think that Brazil has been very good for those companies also. You look at the ones that are the companies that have made Brazil an export platform. You're looking at John Deere and Caterpillar, those things are made in Brazil and then exported all around the world also.
Yeah, it really kind of helps frame the relationship better. That while a lot of people don't understand the country, others have large multinational conglomerates have been investing and have been partnering up with Brazilian people and other competitors and companies and ecosystems, building something amazing in the region. Switching gears a sec, what's next, right? So 30 plus years in service.
I thought we were the relationship.
So 30 plus years serving, doing an amazing job in all the Portuguese, and because I noticed you did stints in Portugal and, if I'm not mistaken,
Mozambique, yes.
And Mozambique, yes. So it's Portuguese and Spanish.
And I call fading Thai.
What's next?
I don't know. I think I purposely decided I wanted to take at least 6 months off after I retired. So I'm at I think month 5 right now. I've taken 2 trips to Europe. I've taken a trip to Rio. I'm going to Colombia tomorrow.
Nice.
My mom is 91 and not doing so well, so I've also made a lot of trips home in the last. I've been going home like every couple of weeks, every month. So, and I have a number of house projects here in Florida I've been attacking also. I don't know. I want to do something that will kind of continue to enhance, the relationship writ large, but also commercially between the U.S. and Latin America. And Brazil is the country that I know the best also. So I don't know. I'm looking to do something that will be both interesting and continue to have a positive impact.
Well, if there's anything that we as a chamber can do to help you in that step, please do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Oh, absolutely. And if you have any different ideas that you want to bring to the chamber that we can build on, we're happy to do it.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting, a unique time. I think this is a time that we haven't seen before as far as at a political level. I think that the elections in Brazil this year will be interesting to see how that plays out. Not only who wins, but like how that may affect the
dynamics.
Dynamics. I think traditionally the U.S. government has always taken, at least during my 33 years, really effort to not put its thumb on the scale on elections. We generally restrict senior level travel to a country leading up to an election. I think that's changed. I think that we saw Secretary Rubio go to Hungary last week, just months before the contested election there. So with looking into Brazil, I don't know what we're going to see, but I think it may look different than it has in the past.
Well, we're wrapping it up. Final thoughts on Brazil, on Florida specifically. I mean, Brazil is Florida's largest trade partner. So, and the current kind of environment that we're in.
Well, I've spent a lot more time living in Brazil than living in Florida. I should be asking you the question. My grandparents used to spend part of the year in Naples when I was a child. So I've been coming to Florida ever since I was a kid. which has been a long time. And we bought a house in Fort Lauderdale 5 years ago. But most of the time we've owned the house, I was living in Sao Paulo. So I'm learning a little bit more about Florida and kind of how things work in Florida. But I'm enjoying it very much, and the weather is great.
Can't complain there.
And there's plenty of Brazilian food.
That's right. And well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Well, please reach out to me and everyone for the chamber. Same thing, I'm around. Love to grab a coffee or a caipirinha.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I want to thank you also. Again, I want to thank you for all these years of service. And I also want to thank our audience for watching us, for taking the time to hear you. I also want to remind our audience that our chamber is a very active chamber. We have a lot of upcoming events. So I need to pull out my cheat sheet because we have so many things. But now at the end of this month, we were recording this in late February 2026. We have our burnout awareness workshop that's coming up. We have one of our membership events, which is our open mic. And then going into March and April, we have our bi-monthly members luncheons that we organize every other month. We have an exclusive business roundtable with the Federal Reserve that's going to be coming up in early April. And then we're also planning our first and second rounds of the roadshow for this year. They might be either April and May or May and August. So if the people watching us, if they want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with our chamber, please either visit our website, brazilchamber.org, where you can sign up to receive all the information for the chamber, or follow us on our social media. We're in LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and obviously these videos are going to be coming out on YouTube, and follow our channel on YouTube. Thank you very much again, David.
Great. Thanks again.
Look forward to seeing you at our events.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.